Hello, families of Family Equality. We are so excited to be here with you. I am especially excited because I'm bringing with me some of my colleagues that I don't usually get to collaborate too much with. It's really, really exciting to be sharing you a little bit of an update on the work that we are doing to support families in this time of crisis. And I think even more importantly, to hear from you. What are you experiencing uniquely as a family, as an individual, that is impacting your ability to survive and dare I say thrive during this time of pandemic? So we're really excited to bring this to you today. And this town hall is part of all of our online programming. We have a whole suite of online programs. Last week, we brought 14 events to you. This week, we're bringing 12. We're really trying to bring community, connection, and joy to all of the LGBTQ plus families across the country and prospective families as well. Make sure that tomorrow you check out our very special Drag Queen Story Hour with Nina West. If you don't know who Nina West is, she's a drag queen from the Midwest who actually won Miss Congeniality on RuPaul's Drag Race last year. I know that my kids really, really loved her because we watched that show together as a family, and that's going to be a really amazing experience. And that's brought to you as well by Our Shelves, which is a diverse, inclusive kids subscription box service. And we're really excited to be partnering with them as well. So today we really are wanting to bring to you some updates on the work that we're doing and to hear from you about what's pressing in your life. And so we're really going to be relying heavily on our comments sections. We're really going to be listening to what you're saying to us. And we're going to hopefully be able to integrate some of the struggles that you're experiencing into our policy priorities moving forward. So we are going to start by actually kicking it off with our chief policy officer, which is Denise Brogan-Kator, who's going to tell you a little bit about our policy work, maybe a little bit about what we do in normal times, and then how that work has pivoted and shifted to this emergency pandemic response, both in the local, state, and federal level. We're working tirelessly 24/7 to be serving you and your family. And Denise is going to tell us a little bit about that right now.
And welcome everybody. It's great to us in this way. I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to introduce you to the work of the policy team and to the policy team. As Kristen said, I'm Denise Brogan-Kator. I'm the Chief Policy Officer. I don't know if everybody's screens are organized the way mine are. On clockwise, and the right side of my screen is Shelbi Day. Oh, now she just moved down to the bottom right. Shelbi is the co-director of our state policy group and is also the for quality. Next to her is Julie Kruse. Julie is the director of our federal policy work. Rohmiller, who disappeared suddenly from our screen, is the other co-director of Policy Counsel. We organize our work into a variety of different frames to try and narrow down and take on in manageable pieces policy change for families. One of the ways we do that is we do it geographically. So I mentioned that men are co-directors of our state policy group. They're both part-time makeup person, and Julie is in charge of our federal work. So we separate the work a little bit by geography. Federal. But then we also break it down into functional policy areas. So I don't know how much you know about policy. Policy is something that forms through, and that happens in a variety of different ways. It happens, in other words, legislatures or federal Congress, but it also happens at the cases get tried before courts and there is an opportunity for a court to weigh in on, often, especially when we're talking about civil rights, like Family Equality works on, it talks about an interpretation of the Constitution. Not particular law is in line with the Constitution or runs afoul of it. And then finally, we have and there's Mary's back. And finally, we have a work in the executive and administrative level where we advocate for good policy or delay bad policy. And that's also true at both the federal and the state level. So we work in these functional areas across these geographic. And our goal, of course, is simple. We want to promote policy that helps LGBTQ families thrive, attain not just equality, but full lived and legal equality. So one might even call it, so we across all modalities in order to make that happen. One of the questions that we often get, and I'm going to throw an answer out there right at the beginning, is how individuals and families can get involved as we try to move policy for the state. And the truth is that there's a number of ways that you can get involved and help us in our work. First and foremost, mostly about, is share your story. Tell us what you have experienced in your life. And it doesn't have to be a bad experience. It's helpful to us and help us frame our advocacy, but it can also be a good experience. My kids are thriving, that is headed by this trans person and this other person, or is headed by two people of the same sex, or patients, parent families, etc. So learning about your family and how it moves through life, because it's when we tell those stories to the people who make law and policy. Another way is to sign up for our routinely send opportunities for you to take direct action, either at the federal level or at the state level, to take direct action where you be right on the ground. There is certain, and you certainly should, by all means, go to our familyequality.org and who your elected officials are. You should establish a personal relationship with the state or federal. I can tell you that my elected officials know me pretty well because they hear from you. Once you start involved with telling these officials what's important to you, they're important to them. And then, of course, vote. So there are lots of ways that you can get involved. And right now, I'm just going to turn it back to Justin and to you all so that we can hear what you have. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Denise. Your mic was cutting out a tiny bit, so you just may want to see if you need to reboot your router or something like that. I know all of our Wi-Fi and streaming systems are just stretched very thin right now across the country, probably across the world. And so we're still really excited to hear from you. And I really want to start off with the CARES Act. I know that family equality was absolutely at the table for developing that, and to really kick it off by thinking about unemployment benefits. I kind of, primed the pot a little bit here and put my own personal experience in our Facebook comments. But I would love to hear from you, Julie. A lot of people have been having trouble accessing unemployment. I know LGBTQ plus families are even more likely to be relying on the gig economy to be cobbling together 2 or 3 different jobs. And so I'd love to hear from you. Can you say a little bit about what is policy doing with unemployment? What can families do to increase their access to it? What have you been seeing out in the field, and what kind of stories do you want to hear?
Yeah, Tristan, so you're absolutely right. There's been a recent study just in the last week showing that LGBTQ families are more likely to have our work hours reduced during this crisis. And so we're really feeling the economic impact hard. And we know that there are 22 million unemployed Americans, but we also know that for every American that has registered themselves as unemployed, there are 2 others who have not been able to get through to the unemployment system and achieve their benefits. And we were working with a young person who's a big part of our Every Child Deserves a Family campaign, a young man who could not get his unemployment benefits after his hours were reduced to 0 for 4 weeks. And we know that for people applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, that the barrier is even greater. So Family Equality is working with LGBTQ families to access benefits you're eligible for. And we just did a workshop on how to do that. And you can see our recorded workshop. And maybe Tristan, you or Anna could put that in the stream here. But to find out how you can contact your members of Congress and their constituent services staff and get help on accessing benefits and identify other local sources of support like food banks and other resources. So for starters, you can find your elected officials and their contact information through the Family Equality website at familyequality.org/elected-officials-lookup. And as I said, one of our foster alumni team members was not able to access his unemployment benefits for 4 full weeks. And he actually called his member of Congress and spoke at length with the constituent services staff, but things are still a little slow. So he then tweeted at his member of Congress, and the next day, all 4 weeks of unemployment benefits were direct deposited into his bank account. So do not be afraid to self-advocate, and do not be afraid to find your elected officials and reach out to them directly. And please feel free to contact us if you're having a difficult time reaching the people who can help you unleash these benefits that should be available to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that, Julie. And I know we're going to continue to see more shifts and changes, and it's run by the state. I think I actually couldn't even get put on hold when I tried to call my unemployment office. It just was busy. And I don't think I've heard a busy signal in 10 years. That's just not how our systems are set up anymore. And so I know families are struggling with that. And so I really appreciate all you're doing and that information about, I'm literally Googling who my member of Congress is right now. So I appreciate that tip. And we did put that link up on all of our live streams. So people should be able to click that in the comment section. So yeah, thanks for including that. So I know a big thing that's, present for my family with 3 kids, age 2.5 to 12, is schooling at home. And our eldest son is on an IEP and isn't able to access any of the services that he usually gets access to. We've been trying to cobble those together ourselves at home as parents who are also trying to work at the same time. I'd love to hear from you, Mary. Can you tell us a little bit about, what are LGBTQ plus families experiencing in terms of education? What about kids with special needs, kids with disabilities? Talk with me a little bit about what you see happening out there in the world, what Family Equality is doing, and if you need to hear from families, what kind of stories are you looking for to do some advocacy work?
For sure, and this is an issue that's really impacting our community because we have a large portion of parents in our community that do have children with special needs. So it's something that we at Family Equality are very tuned into because it's not only important to our community, but to many of us who work here, it's important to us on a personal level, as you mentioned, Tristan. So we're all kind of in this new environment of education where we're all kind of thrown into doing this for our kids at home while balancing all of these other things. I think that we also, there's a extent of grace with the school districts that of course have to be allowed for because they're in a new situation too. So I think that when you're looking at these issues, to look at them through a lens of trying to find the school as your partner and to do what's best for your kid and to come in to it with that perspective rather than to immediately come in with an adversarial perspective is always a good beginning to get the conversation started with your school districts. So IEPs are individualized education plans, and Section 504 plans are plans that are worked out between the student's family or caretakers and the school district. And they are very specific, where they talk about the specific needs of a child in the educational setting and what the school is going to do and is required by federal law to do to make sure that those kids get the same level of free and appropriate education that kids without specialized needs have access to. So in this new environment, of course, all of these services, for instance, my son had an IEP on speech. And obviously there's no one-on-ones with a speech therapist available at this point anymore. And now that we've been doing this for about 6 weeks, I think some school districts are starting to figure out ways to do that over Zoom and but certainly the specific way it's mentioned in the IEP is no longer an option. So there have to be conversations and flexibility with the school district and with the person at your school who's your special education representative on, these are my child's needs. How can we adapt to that in this environment to continue to give my child those needs? So for speech, it's not as, with Zoom, that was a solution that was viable for us. However, for students many students can't spend this much time at the computer as the kids are being asked to do right now at a very young age. So to solely rely on technology for these children is very difficult, but yet there's the challenge of we can't have physical contact right now either, and we can't be that close. So again, like the very first step in all of this is to communicate with your school, with your special education provider at your school, and to make sure that you are documenting everything that your child is going through, what's difficult for your child, what works for your child. Every conversation you have with somebody at the school, if it's an oral, if it's over the phone, I would immediately send them a follow-up email in writing to say exactly what it is that was discussed, what understandings were reached, and what time frames are being put on that, so that way you can move forward. And that way you have documentation when children do go back to school of accountability and what steps were being taken, what steps were missed, and what steps need to be done to remediate the situation and to get your child back to where they should have been. I would note also that it is important to remember that even if your school is closed and not providing distance learning, you are still entitled to special education services. The state is required to give each child a free and appropriate public education, and kids with special needs in particular, this long period of time without the contact, without the physical in-person classroom experience, causes more detriment to their education than it does to kids without special needs. They have more ground to make up. So the schools need to be thinking about what they're going to do now, even if schools are closed, they need to figure out what services they're going to be providing to your child so that your child is not falling even further behind. So I think that keeping in mind that, and one other thing that is important to mention that just came up actually 2 days ago, and I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this before. In this last, and the big stimulus package that came through, there was a provision in there that allowed ask the Federal Department of Education to say which provisions of the federal law that govern special education that they wanted to have waived. And we were all very nervous about what they were going to say. And shockingly, they came out and said none of them. So there is no federal waiver of the special education requirements that are happening, because there is a certain degree of flexibility built into the system. They understand, again, like in my case, we understand that we can't have the in-person speech therapy, so we're going to find another solution. So those flexibilities are already built into it, and we didn't need further federal waivers telling the schools, you know what, you get a pass, you don't even have to try. The school has to try, and they have to work with parents and caretakers to figure out what they can be doing. And I think that if you do run into trouble with your school district, please do feel free to reach out to us and contact us. We have a connection with a nationwide organization that has lists of special education advocates and attorneys in every state. So we can certainly try to find a connection for you that would be able to provide you specific advice that's specific to your state and to your school district. So, but again, I know this is frustrating. I feel everybody's frustration, but do take a deep breath and try to remember that the school's struggling a lot too, and we're all kind of in this together. And I really encourage this coming from the perspective of this partnership rather than immediately coming in and telling them they're failing. I would come in and say, okay, this is what's happening in our situation. What can we do for my child? Because I would say even more than 9 times out of 10, the school district wants to help your child. We can't, I don't think there are many people out there who have true ill intentions. They just don't know how to do it right now. And they're overwhelmed and overburdened. And so just giving each other some grace and working together is a good place to start.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And then will you just say, I realized that I used the phrase IEP, and because I'm in this world, I know what it is. Will you just explain for folks what is an IEP in case they don't know?
For sure. It's your individualized education plan. And that is a plan that is governed by federal law, which is the Individuals Disability and Education Act. And that has very specific requirements and regulations for the process of you have an initial, when your child has a special need, you have an initial meeting with your school, it's a group of people from your school, the parent or caretaker. You discuss what the child needs, then you discuss if they need testing, and you go through a very specific process that has a timeline that's governed by federal regulations and about a stack of paperwork that's about that high. And then at the end of it, you come out with a plan, and that plan, which is called your IEP, has very specific benchmarks that your child, that the school is supposed to be providing for your child to still move forward in their education. And I would also note that if you're in a situation where you had started the IEP process but not finished it before your school closed, you should still reach out to your school and get that process back moving. They can have meetings with you by Zoom or some other, there's still ways while again, we might give them some grace with the specific deadlines, they should still be moving the process forward. And if you suspect, because now that we're all seeing how our children learn at home, we might kind of have some suspicions that they might have something going on that we didn't know about before and that we want to have them tested for. Reach out to your principal, tell them what you're concerned about. And they are still, again, we can't do the one-on-one testing right now with some of the assessments with the educational psychologists and others, but you can get the process started and you can say, hey, I think my child has, a processing issue or something along those lines. And the school is still responsible for moving forward with that. That is still something that will trigger this process to start. So go ahead and do that. Don't feel like you have to, that the school can bury it all under right now just because they're not physically there.
That's great. And then also, I think if your child is below school age, we are still getting, in Portland, Oregon, we're still getting services from the county for our toddler because he was getting speech therapy through the county as well. And so I think, and there was a delay, and now they're able to do those weekly sessions over video chat. So obviously it's not as useful, but we can at least talk to his speech language pathologist and we can say, here are the struggles that he's having. And for the 30 seconds, we can get him to pay attention to the computer. We can try and get him to say the words that he's having an issue with. And then they can give us the coaching that we need to keep him moving forward on his speech language development. So I think in schools, it's important. And also if you're working with any kind of, any other kind of early education programs, what I'm hearing you say is don't be afraid to advocate in a way where at least you're starting treating those people as partners instead of adversaries, not assuming malintent, because most people went into education to help work with kids, to help kids who are struggling. And so I think that attitude piece is really good. And sometimes it's hard to access when we're in the middle of a pandemic. It might be a little bit stressed out.
For sure.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of what we've already touched on, we're relying I think more than we ever imagined we would on our elected officials to really shepherd us through these really difficult times. And one thing that I'm really worried about is democracy. One thing I'm thinking a lot about is here in Oregon, we have a primary coming up in like 2 weeks. We just got our ballots in the mail yesterday, and we're vote by mail in Oregon. Washington is 100% vote by mail. That's not true all over the country, and we've actually seen people coming out and risking their own safety because they believe it's so important to make their voice be heard. So, Julie, I'd love to hear from you. What are we looking at in terms of the election in November and primaries between now and then? Are we going to be able to vote by mail in other states? Is the Second CARES Act going to provide some support for that? How are we doing? How are our families going to be able to make their voices heard this year?
Yeah, this is a critical issue, and it is being debated in Congress right now. And there are members of Congress, like Speaker Pelosi, that would like to see vote by mail nationwide, and then there's folks like Majority Leader McConnell, who is not in the Senate, who's not supporting that effort. So we at Family Equality think that keeping our democracy strong and making sure everybody has a vote is critically important. And so that is one of our demands to Congress to include in upcoming COVID-19 legislation. It has not been adequately addressed. There has been some funding for vote by mail, but not adequate funding in the four COVID-19 response bills to date. And you can go to our COVID-19 response legislation tracker. It's actually at familyequality.org/campaigns/tracking COVID-19 response legislation. And there we look at all of the important elements that need to be part of the federal response to this crisis. And we say where the government has done a good job so far, where Congress has done a good job so far in terms of providing needed benefits, and what we still need to see. And one of our demands is that Americans be able to vote by mail in this year's elections to protect our democracy and our health. And we want to see vote by mail allowed nationwide, and we are pushing very hard for that. I just wanted to mention, since we're on the subject of our COVID-19 legislative action page, that we are leading the effort, Family Equality is leading the effort to demand Congress include non-discriminations for LGBTQ people and others in all COVID-19 response services. We know through a recent study that LGBTQ people have been impacted harder economically by the pandemic than non-LGBTQ people. We know that underlying health conditions make LGBTQ people more susceptible to the damage of the COVID-19 virus itself. We know that 1 in 3 transgender people have been discriminated against in healthcare in the past, and that more than 1 in 4 transgender people have delayed or seeking healthcare or not sought it at all due to fear of discrimination and mistreatment. And these kinds of discrimination, these kinds of delays in getting healthcare can be fatal during this pandemic. Right at this moment, the Trump administration has indicated it is going to weaken existing healthcare non-discrimination protections for transgender people right now during a national emergency. So we are leading the fight so that Congress will clarify in its next COVID-19 legislation response bill that discrimination is illegal. And we are asking them to add that to the next COVID-19 response legislation. And we have joined hands with groups like the NAACP, the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, to demand full equality during the pandemic in all response services. And we really encourage you to add your voice to that effort and visit our Tracking COVID-19 Response Legislation site that I mentioned, and you can easily click to take action and email Congress with our priorities for LGBTQ families during this crisis, but you can add your specific priorities and emphasize your priorities there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, there's just like so much to do. And I really do think that ensuring that everyone has the right to vote is just so critical to the bedrock of our culture. And now is as good a time as any to make sure that everyone can vote from home or however that they want, and be safe while doing so. So thanks for that update. Speaking of safety, you know, I'm on social media a lot. And one of the things that I've been seeing show up is a lot of attention paid to young people, LGBTQ plus people who are under the age of 18, who are living at home, whose parents and families are not supportive. And I think, you know, in many of those cases, they can find a way to make it through because they're going to school, they're hanging out with their friends, etc. Now, more kids than ever are at home with parents who maybe are not supportive, or who maybe even venturing into, you know, beyond unsupportive and into a situation where that young person does need to leave the home. So I'd love to hear from you. How have our foster care systems been impacted by COVID-19? How has adoption been impacted by COVID? Can people still apply to be a foster parent? Can they still get a placement? What's going on with that? I know, you know, we have a foster alumni board. What are you hearing from them? What are you seeing out in the world?
Yeah, so we're definitely seeing that the child welfare system, which already was in crisis before this pandemic, is really been hard hit. So things like clearly home visits to families that are struggling, including families that are struggling to accept their LGBTQ children, those have been extremely limited. And agencies are trying really hard to find foster parents, to bring them on board, to train them virtually. But we have seen that there is going to be a pent-up demand at the end of this pandemic for services, and that the government needs to allocate many more resources to this, and will need to post-pandemic as well. And so far, the amount of money that's been included in COVID-19 response legislation for child welfare has been pittance. It has been under $50 million out of $3 trillion in total funding. So 0.0001% of the funding is going towards this. So we're part of a group, a larger coalition pushing for increased funding. But we work particularly with young people with lived experience in foster care. So the young people you're talking about who were rejected or abused by their families of origin, many times precisely because they identify as LGBTQ, that have been in the foster care system, and because of the discrimination they faced in the foster care system, are less likely to be to find, you know, loving adoptive forever homes. And so many young LGBTQ people have aged out without a family. So that means when they lose their student housing and are told, well, go home to your family, they don't necessarily have a family to go home to. And so they need housing when they lose their student housing. And a lot of their supports that they are received through the foster care system are contingent on them working or studying. Well, right now they need those work and educational requirements to be lifted because their schools have closed and many of them have been laid off. And so Family Equality leads the Every Child Deserves a Family campaign with partners, including Foster Club, Voice for Adoption, Child Welfare League of America, and True Colors United, that all focus on advocating for these young people. And we are working daily with them to help connect foster youth to urgently needed resources. And I would definitely recommend that any young person with lived experience in foster care that needs help turn to the resources available at www.fosterclub.com. And I would strongly urge children who are facing abuse in their homes to turn to the resources of the Trevor Project for those young people who are still at home with families that may not be accepting and affirming them, and where conflict may be increasing due to sheltering at home together, that they look to the Trevor Project. So again, it would encourage the Trevor Project resources for young LGBTQ people still at home with family conflict, and fosterclub.com for resources for young people who are in foster care or who were in foster care. I finally want to say, and you mentioned this, Tristan, Family Equality is really proud that we in Foster Club co-chair a group that's part of our Every Child Deserves a Family campaign, and that is our LGBTQ plus and Two-Spirit Foster alumni team. And this is a team of LGBTQ and Two-Spirit young people who aged out of foster care. And they are facing the pandemic themselves. They are facing, really difficult challenges themselves. But at the same time, they're leading efforts to support other LGBTQ and Two-Spirit young people with lived experience in foster care. And we are really, really proud to be supporting these teams. And really encourage anyone who has stories of the challenges they're facing or need help to reach out to us. Let us know your stories so we can better advocate for you, and let us know how we can help support you in your individual situation and link you to needed resources.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And we're actually about to launch an adoption and foster care series on our neighborhood platform, which is where we're hosting all of our online resources and events. And so in about 2 weeks, we're going to have 3 different panels specifically focusing on how individuals can provide emergency or respite care through or with the foster care system, how they can register now to become a foster parent, and other ways that they can be part of relieving some of the burden that's there, because the states are just quite overwhelmed, as you've mentioned. So we're really excited to continue to support that work.
Yeah, and Tristan, I think that's really important, both for now, and I really have to commend you. I know that you've taken in a young person yourself who was facing a hard time during this pandemic. But there's both a demand now for respite care and foster parents. But as I said, there will be a huge pent-up demand as soon as agencies can reopen and resume their normal function. So to get in the pipeline now to be able to help young people that are desperately in need of help is really a wonderful thing to do, and really a wonderful way to build your family.
Yeah, that's right. And I think if you are a family who does have a spare room or, does have some of those extra resources, this is a place where you can put it. And, I was just raised in a home where, I was taught that when a young person needs help, you show up. And so we sort of always had some version of a revolving door. My joke was we were like my mom's home for wayward children. And, that was just sort of our joke. And, if I had a friend in school who was having trouble at home, they came to stay with us. And then we did have a formal, I have a foster sister, and so I just know how important it is that people are able to do that. And it really is a chance to change the trajectory of someone's life forever, and basically get all the bad stuff out of their way so that they can be the resilient, strong, powerful person that they were always meant to be. So
yeah, and Tristan, that's so important. And one of the things our leadership team is working on right now is that a lot of them are resilient and have built their lives despite aging out of foster care without a family. And that's why it's so frustrating to face a month and a half of unemployment and see your savings eaten away when you built that yourself. So our foster alumni leadership team is looking at really even more innovative ways to get resources to young people who have worked so hard and come so far and now are facing, these incredible barriers due to no fault of their own. And so again, if young people come to us, we would love to hear your stories, and we would love to connect you to the resources that I already mentioned, Foster Club, Trevor Project, and any new projects that our leadership team develops over time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Now, the last thing that I want to really touch on before I kind of do a summary of what we've covered, I've been seeing a lot of these news alerts about some millions of dollars of relief going to organizations that are refusing to provide adequate or equal services to LGBTQ plus people, employees, families. That seems to me to be completely counter to the supposed values of the sort of separation of church and state and those kinds of things. And I've been really worried about that. I don't think that our country's money should be going to organizations that are explicitly discriminating against families like ours. And so I'd love to know more about what are we doing to ensure that the CARES Act and the other COVID response efforts are not directly funding or benefiting organizations that are not abiding by our non-discrimination laws in this country.
Well, I can start, and then Denise could jump in. So, family equality, we lead the effort to pass the Every Child Deserves a Family Act so that once and for all, discrimination will be barred in foster care and adoption in our families. And we know that 11 states have actually passed legislation explicitly allowing federally funded child welfare agencies to turn away same-sex couples and LGBTQ people and people of other faiths. So this is critically important and creates even more barriers to the child welfare system and to our families and young people during this pandemic. Family Equality has also led the effort to get over 200 groups to sign on to a letter demanding that Congress bar exactly what you're talking about, bar discrimination against LGBTQ people in any COVID-19 response services, so that any organization that takes federal funding would have to serve everyone equally based on eligibility and need, and no other irrelevant factors or factors that have nothing to do with merit. As I said before, we know that our families are disproportionately impacted by this crisis. We're disproportionately impacted in our health and in our economics. So the idea of being discriminated against in the services that we need to get through this, just like everybody else, is heartbreaking. And finally, the House has passed the Equality Act, and the Senate must pass the Equality Act so that there's no discrimination against LGBTQ people in federally funded services and in public accommodations ever again. And in crises like these show exactly how needed those non-discrimination provisions are. And again, if you go to our familyequality.org action page, you can take action in support of the Equality Act. You can take action in support of the Every Child Deserves a Family Act. You can take action into demanding that HHS and the White House not discriminate in healthcare in COVID-19 response services, and more. So please do check that out.
Thanks, Julie. I would just say that if you have experienced discrimination in your access of COVID-19 benefits, health or aspect of your lives that are particularly impacted by the pandemic, the things, as Julie mentioned, that we're working on is trying to ensure that anti-discrimination language gets to all subsequent legislation, but also retroactive to all prior legislation that was passed to address the pandemic. Heard about the Samaritan's Purse temporary hospital in New York City, outside of Mount Sinai Hospital, where they require you to sign a expressing that you believe that marriage is between one biological man and one biological, and that obviously arouses concern for us. We have the HUD that it discriminate against LGBTQ people in its care, but just the mere fact that providers have to sign such a statement suggests that the likelihood of some form of discrimination is high. That used anything, we'd like to know that, because it will help us in our advocacy to ensure that we ban and prohibit such discrimination.
And I just want to reiterate what Denise said, in part because her mic was cutting out on occasion, but I wanted to make sure all of you heard this. We need your stories. We would like to know your stories and your experience during the COVID-19 crisis. We would like to hear about any challenges you're facing, any discrimination you've faced, what your family is going through. And even if you're not facing any particular challenges other than sheltering at home together, even if you're not having problems accessing benefits, we would like to hear your story. And let me tell you why. We need to tell the story of LGBTQ families and young people during this pandemic. We need to show your members of Congress that you exist, that you live in their district, and that they should care about you. So whether your story is a wonderful resiliency and success story, or whether your story is a painful one of challenges that you are really facing right now, we need those stories to go to Congress and say, our families exist, they live in your district, they live in your state, they are equally worthy of services as everyone else. and you must be accountable to them if you want to be reelected. And so your stories are absolutely the best tool we have for that. And if you look at our website, you can see stories that we've shared with Congress. If you look at our everychilddeservesafamily.com website, you can see the stories that we've shared with Congress, because they are the most effective tool we have. And I can tell you, when I reach out to your member of Congress and tell them why it's so important to support our families, they kind of, I'm a lobbyist, whatever. They may be multitasking and paying attention halfway. When I tell them your name and your story and your address showing that you live in their district and you're paying attention, then they set down whatever else they were doing, look me square in the eye right now over Zoom rather than in person, and start paying attention. So really, we can only do our job effectively if you help us by sharing your stories. Again, whether those are personal stories, stories about other people that you know, discrimination stories, stories about challenges, or just stories about how resilient and strong your family is during this crisis.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And, I think I shared with you already, Julie, but I did get so frustrated with the unemployment thing that, I got some e-blast basically from Earl Blumenauer and, the representative of here in Oregon. And it was just a bulk email. Somehow I ended up on his list, right? And it said, if you're having problem accessing your COVID-19 benefits, email me. And I was like, okay, I think I will. And I did. I submitted a form, and someone from his staff called me back from DC the next day. I honestly thought this is me screaming into the void. But it is that, as you said, and you did a whole workshop specifically on this. Their job is to keep us happy because they want to keep their jobs. And honestly, it was successful. Not in being able to access the unemployment benefits. We're still working on that. But I will forever be indebted to him and his staff because they actually did call me, and it felt like they actually cared about our family. And so really encourage people to do, what you mentioned, tweet, call, do everything you can. And just to summarize, some of the sort of top line points we talked about here today, we really started by talking about that, accessing those unemployment benefits. And what I heard from you, Julie, is to, advocate for yourself. Don't be afraid to tweet at somebody. Don't be afraid to call. Don't be afraid to email. I would add, if you feel like you can't personally do that, this is a great job for allies. So if you know someone who's always said, what do you need? How can I help? Ask them to do some of that work on your behalf, because they're probably happy to do that. And contact us. If there's something that you're hitting a brick wall and you need help, let our policy team know. Let us sort of take up the mantle and fight and advocate on your behalf.
I can't agree with that more, Tristan. I am really thrilled that you had such a good experience with your representative. Their offices are slammed too, so some other people may not have such good responses. We may be able to help you find other staffers in those offices. And one thing I just want to mention, you have a representative and you have 2 senators, and these are for your federal benefits. Unemployment insurance is also a state benefit, so you also have a state representative and a state senator. But just looking at your federal representatives and your senators, you may think that you don't really like your particular senators or your particular representative, but often the ones you don't like are precisely the ones that have excellent constituent services staffers that are more than happy to help your families. So you do have 3, unless you're like me and live in DC and don't have senators. Otherwise, you do have 3 federal representatives, 2 senators, and 1 representative. And I would encourage you to see all of them as a resource, regardless of whether you agree with their politics or not.
That's perfect. Thank you so much. And then the second thing that we looked at was really around education. How can you be working with your school district, with your county, to make sure that your kids are getting all the resources they need during this really difficult time for all of us who are homeschooling or unschooling or barely schooling or whatever anyone is calling it. And, what I really heard from Mary is just, especially if you have a kid with special needs or a kid who has an IEP, a specific individualized education program, is to just make sure that you're documenting everything that's happening, both good and bad. I think that, it's both the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I'm also the more flies with honey, if I can use two analogies. I think you get just as much done if you're able to say, here are the amazing things that your special ed director has done for us. And here's the next thing we're asking for. I think if you're able to, come with the attitude that Mary talked about, as seeing them as a collaborator and really affirming what's working, it's going to make it even better, even easier for you to get that next thing that you feel like would really help your child break through. The third thing that we talked about was access to voting and our democracy. And, what I heard from you, Julie, is, it's what's happening right now is not good enough, but continue to stay engaged and involved on our COVID response website to see what we're doing. And we will give you action items that you can take so that you can be advocating to have absentee voting available for you, vote by mail available for you. So you don't have to risk your health or your family's health to go to the polls this year. I think we all understand how important this November is going to be for our communities and all other communities who are marginalized. So make sure you stay engaged with that. And then we talked about foster care. We heard from you, Julie, that, it's just critical now and into the future that we're encouraging as many people as possible to consider learning more about what it would be to be a foster parent, what it would mean to provide emergency respite for parents and families who are struggling with their young person's identity or who are not able to support them. And if you are a young person who's struggling, make sure that you are in connection with the Trevor Project, that you're in connection with fosterclub.com, who can help you with resources. And I also heard something important, which is to advocate for the lifting of the work or school requirements for access to services. I think that's really critical. And then I would just, of course, encourage people to come to our workshops that are coming up on how to become a foster parent. I'm really excited. We're going to have a panel of LGBTQ people who have been through foster and adoption, so that you'll be able to actually hear from people like you, trans parents, gay dads, bi families, poly families, lesbian moms, single parents by choice. If you think maybe you're not the right person to become a foster parent, I really encourage you to reconsider, because you do not have to be a perfect parent to be a great parent. And so I would really want to encourage people to check those out. And then I think finally, we talked about discrimination. It's if you are encountering discrimination while you're trying to access your benefits, please let us know. We are in partnership with many other organizations. We may be able to bring your case forward. We may be able to use your case. Your story could be that linchpin that changes the face of the COVID-19 response. We are really able to do that. We're at those decision-making tables of power. We want to bring your story, good or bad, because it really could make a big difference. What is the best way, by the way, Julie, for people to send those stories to you? By email, or is there a form online?
There is a form online, and maybe you or Anna could provide it, but it is, I believe it's everychilddeservesafamily.com/share your story. But I'm going to count on you to find that link and share it. And I believe we also have a story sharing site through our Family Equality website as well. But either of those, that we've set them up to be super easy. You enter your name. We do ask your address. We do ask for your address so we can share your story with your actual member of Congress, which we need your address for. We won't share it. We won't actually share your address. We'll just tell them we know for sure you're in their district. And we ask a few simple questions, and a lot of people are able to fill this out in like 5, 10, 15 minutes. And we let you upload a picture really easily. That makes your story even that much more real to your elected officials. And I really cannot tell you how much those stories mean. We recently testified, our CEO testified, and one of our young people with lived experience in foster care testified before the House Oversight Committee about discrimination that LGBTQ people face and what needs to be done about that. And we provided stories to members of Congress that were just a piece of paper or 3 paragraphs and a picture, and they held those stories up, and the cameras in that congressional hearing room were on those stories as they said, these people, this family lives in my district and I care about them for this reason. And that is an incredibly powerful way to fight for our families. So please do give us that tool of sharing your story.
Thank you so much. And if you are as impressed as I am every time I talk with our policy team and hear from our policy team, I also really encourage you to continue to support our work. And one way that you're able to do it is by sharing your story. And another way you're able to do it, if you have the capacity, is to make a gift. I know that things have been really hard for nonprofits across the board. You know, I'm on several boards, board of directors of nonprofits, and I know that things are tough for us. And even if you're able to give $5 a month so that we can keep doing this work, keep providing these digital programs for you and your family to bring that joy, to bring that connection, to bring that community, so we can keep advocating on the front lines to make sure that our voice is at the table, that our families are not forgotten. It is just more important than ever that everyone is able to stay engaged in our work programmatically. Send us your stories. And if you're able to, please make an investment in your family and in our work by becoming a monthly donor. We would really appreciate that. So thank you so much to Julie and Denise and to Mary and Shelbi, who had to hop off and do something urgent. It seems like everything that you all are doing all the time is urgent. And so I do not envy the work that you're doing. But I'm just so proud to serve on this team with you and to call myself a member of the Family Equality team.
Well, thank you, Tristan, and thank you to everybody who listened in. We did and hear from you.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful almost weekend. We're almost there, team. Thank you very much to both of you and your whole team, and to everyone who shared some comments and their stories. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.